Have you ever been stuck in one of those brutally long political meetings, just thinking to yourself, man, it literally cannot get worse than this? Well, I want you to hold on to that thought for a second, because really, what is the absolute worst way a high-stakes diplomatic assembly could end? A shouting match, a sudden declaration of war, a dramatic walkout? How about the floor suddenly giving away and plunging straight down into a medieval cesspit full of raw human waste? I know it sounds like some kind of dark joke or a scene from a gruesome movie, but I promise you, this is entirely real.
So let's get into it. Welcome to our explainer on what has to be one of the most bizarre, undignified, and tragic historical events of the entire 12th century, the Erfurt Latrine disaster of 1184. Today, we're going to unpack the historical records to see exactly how dozens of the Holy Roman Empire's most powerful men met their shockingly foul end, all because of a diplomatic dispute, a wooden floor, and a sheer excess of weight.
Section 1. A royal feud. The dispute that required an emperor's intervention.
To figure out how all these doomed figures ended up in the same room together, we've got to look at the sheer scale of their conflict. This wasn't just some random town hall. This was a massive, high-stakes intervention. On one side, you've got Landgrave Louis III of Thuringia, and on the other, Archbishop Conrad of Mainz. Ever since the defeat of a real heavy hitter named Henry the Lion, the land dispute between these two men had just exploded. It got so incredibly intense that local authorities couldn't handle it anymore, basically forcing the Holy Roman Emperor himself, Frederick Barbarossa, to step in. So how does the emperor decide to handle it? He orders his 18-year-old son, King Henry VI, to go clean up the mess. And this brilliantly shows you just how serious this was. Young King Henry was actually right in the middle of a military campaign heading to Poland. He had to completely divert his army just to travel to Erfurt and convene a Hoftag. Now, a Hoftag was essentially a formal court day, a massive state assembly designed specifically to mediate these high-level disputes.
Section 2. The Doomed Assembly. Gathering at Erfurt.
All right, so King Henry has arrived, the warring parties are present, and the local elite are all packed in to witness this royal mediation. But where exactly are they meeting? Historical sources argue a bit over who actually owned the building. Some say it was the local provost, others claim it was the bishop's residence. But they all agree on its physical location. It was the upper floor of a two-story building right near the Erfurt Cathedral. And unfortunately, they also all agree on one fatal, disastrous structural flaw. The wooden support beams of this upper floor, they were completely rotten.
The timeline leading up to the catastrophe is lightning fast. Prior to July 1184, the feud is just boiling over. Then, on July 25th, the Feast of St. James, the Hoftag officially convenes. It is this highly dignified, formal affair, attended by the king, his court, bishops, and all the local nobility. But literally the very next morning, on July 26th, all that dignity is completely shattered.
Section 3. Plunge into the cesspit. The collapse.
This is exactly where bad structural engineering meets a horrific twist of fate. Just picture the sheer weight in that room. You have dozens of nobles wearing heavy formal garments, packed shoulder to shoulder to hear the king. Step 1, those rotten wooden beams of the upper floor simply snap under the immense combined weight. But it doesn't stop there. Step 2, the tremendous impact of all those people and heavy debris crashing down causes the ground floor to instantly collapse as well. And step 3, that ground floor opens right up into a dark underground latrine cesspit. The attendees fall straight through the building and plunge directly into a massive vat of raw sewage.
The human cost here was staggering. Roughly 60 people died in this catastrophic failure, and the mechanics of the disaster meant they met their ends in several horrific ways. Some died instantly from the sheer impact of the massive fall. Others were crushed to death by the falling timber and heavy debris of two entire floors coming down on them. And, perhaps most gruesomely, many simply suffocated and drowned in the human waste that filled the cesspit.
When you read the Chronicle of St. Peter's in Erfurt, you realize the devastating blow this dealt to the local aristocracy. In a matter of seconds, the region lost Count Friedrich I of Abenberg, Count Heinrich I of Schwarzburg, Count Gosmar III of Ziegenhain, Burgrave Friedrich I of Kirchberg, Count Burchard of Wartburg, Beringer von Wellingen, and those are just the major names. A massive chunk of the regional nobility was simply extinguished in an instant.
Section 4. Surviving the unthinkable. Narrow escapes.
With an entire floor giving way and 60 people perishing, you really have to wonder, how did anyone, let alone the most important figures in the room, actually survive? Honestly, it came down to pure dumb luck and medieval architecture. 18-year-old King Henry and Archbishop Conrad totally avoided the plunge just because of where they happened to be sitting. They were tucked into a stone window alcove built right into the outer wall. So when the wooden floor ripped away from the walls, they were left dangling there, clinging to the stone for dear life until rescuers could finally bring them down with ladders.
But what about our other feuding party? Well, Landgrave Louis wasn't so lucky with his seating arrangements. He actually fell right into the collapse alongside everyone else. Miraculously, though, against all odds, he managed to survive the fall and the cesspit and was eventually pulled out of the wreckage alive. Though I think it's pretty safe to say the diplomatic mediation was officially canceled at that point.
The aftermath of this whole thing is incredibly ironic. After being rescued by a ladder, King Henry had clearly had enough. He immediately packed up, departed Erfurt, and just resumed his military campaign, heading to Poland, leaving the entire dispute between Louis and Conrad completely unresolved. Meanwhile, the estates of all those dead nobles suddenly passed down to their heirs overnight. For instance, Heinrich's estate went to his brother, Gosmar's to his daughter, and so on. A total transfer of power.
Section 5. A foul folklore legacy. The mythologized disaster. When a historical event is this uniquely macabre and shocking, it doesn't just sit quietly in official chronicles. It bleeds into the public consciousness. Over the centuries, the sheer tragedy of the Erfurt Latrine collapse morphed into local folklore. The tale was famously cemented much later, in 1853, when Ludwig Bechstein included a mythologized version of it in his compilation Deutsches Sagenbuch. And as you know with folklore, the facts definitely got tweaked for a better narrative.
If we compare the actual history to the myth, we see some pretty wild deviations. The folklore refers to Heinrich I as Heinrich VII. Friedrich of Abenberg is suddenly called Friedrich of Arnsberg. And Gosmar? He is bizarrely split into two entirely distinct people. They also upgrade the Hoftag to a Reichstag, move the location over to a Benedictine monastery, and swap out the cesspit for a sewer. But the folklore really makes all these changes just to set up one of the most darkly humorous legendary details in historical myth.
According to that 1853 retelling, Count Heinrich of Schwarzburg allegedly had a favorite catchphrase. Whenever someone challenged him, he would loudly declare, "If I did that, I'd have to drown in the privy." The folklore zeroes right in on this, hammering home the bitter, poetic irony that during the disaster, this very same count ends up aptly drowning in excrement right alongside his peers.
Which brings us to a lingering and honestly fascinating question. These men were counts, burgraves, and landgraves, the absolute pinnacle of 12th century society, gathered together to shape the politics of an empire. Yet nobody remembers their policies today. It really makes you wonder, does history remember our grandest titles, or just how we fall? Thanks for exploring this crazy piece of history with us in this explainer, and remember to always keep questioning the stories that shape our past.